I think the capacity is 220 for this building, so we got even some more space. I know this isn't 220, so this would be great every weekend. But I'm grateful to invite our confirmation classes from all 4 parishes together tonight. But today we have this special celebration of the baptism of the Lord, and we hear Jesus speaking to John, and he makes this request. He's calling John to something, and John the Baptist's response is, "Who, me? You want me to do what? I should be baptized by you. I mean, like, why are you calling me to baptize you?" So there's something about John in this call. He's incredulous, hearing these words of Jesus. And the thing is, we may feel the same way being called by God. Maybe we can go back to a time in our life when we feel God was calling us to something, maybe that nudge in our heart and our soul, and we may have thought, I'm not qualified for that. Yeah, I'm underprepared for that. There's many other people who are better than that have better qualities that should do this. God, why are you calling that to me? This happens throughout all of history. We can go to the Old Testament. Let's go to one of the greatest prophets, Jeremiah. The very beginning of Jeremiah's book, he talks about his calling. And it was God calling him and saying, "Before you were formed in the womb, I knew you, and now I call you to be a prophet to all the nations." And Jeremiah's response is, "Well, who, me? I'm too young. I don't know what to say. I don't have the words." But God said, "I'm going to provide you with the words." I really associated with Jeremiah during my kind of discernment of the priesthood 10 plus years ago. I was kind of thinking, who, me? Why am I being called to this? Why, God, you can find a whole bunch of other people that speak better than me or do all these other things or are holier than me. But it kind of hits at the heart of who God is. The reality of the situation is that God does call us. And he calls us despite our lowliness, despite our sinfulness, despite our perceived shortcomings, is that we have a gracious God who wants to call us regular people to great things. And it starts as we celebrate this feast of the baptism of the Lord. It starts with that first sacrament, baptism. That is the key. That is where we are called. That's where we are starting to be called, and that's where we're called from. Now we kind of maybe ponder baptism on this day. We're like, what is baptism? It's a lot of things. And sometimes it's more than we expect. Sometimes people say, like, "Oh, I want to get my child baptized. I want to because I want them to be protected." That's very important. But sometimes they just want them to be protected, and that's it. They don't come to Mass after that. They don't follow that life that God is living to them. And so there's something about that too, because baptism is just the beginning. It's just the beginning of a great call which the Lord is going to lead us on an adventure. So that's one of the things that baptism is. It's the beginning of a calling. Now, in it is the fact that we are protected. God gives us his protection. He frees us from sins. That's part of the reason why John is so incredulous. Like, why would Jesus need baptism? He's without sin. And at that moment, John's probably saying, this doesn't make sense. But what Jesus is doing here is he's leading for us to follow him. So he goes into those baptismal waters so that we may follow. He makes those waters holy so that when we enter the baptismal waters, we are made holy. So that's part of what baptism is. But today I want to focus on 2 other things that baptism does for us. First is that it reminds us and it gives us a mission. Each and every one of us has a calling. Each and every one of us has a mission. And the second is that it allows us to worship in a greater and deeper way. Worship is important to this. So today I'm going to talk about mission. I'm going to talk about worship. Let's talk about mission to start off with. Each and every one of us has a calling. I'm going to go back and reference a document that some of you may have heard of, in, the Baltimore Catechism. So I'm not going to say when it was, because they may date some people in here, but that's all right. Not trying to do that tonight. So the Baltimore Catechism, you may know it, but it was one great articulation of the faith, still a little bit relevant today. Actually, we'll say it is very relevant today. It was one way that the faith was articulated, and on the very, very first page of the Baltimore Catechism, it says, this is the purpose, this is our meaning in life. And it was this: the purpose of man, the purpose of us here gathered today is to know, love, and serve God in this life, as to be happy with him in the next. That came out probably in the 1800s, but it's still true today. That's our purpose in life. That's our meaning, is to know, love, serve God in this life, as to be happy with him in the next. So when someone else comes up to you and say, I don't know the meaning of life, say, I do. And it's this: it's to know, love, and serve God and to be happy in this life so that we can be happy with him in the next. But Vatican II helped, and that helped even further articulate what our calling and our purpose is in life. Vatican II, the documents, and Pope Leo is going to focus on them especially this year, so I'm probably going to do the same because I copy him a lot, but it's all right. So Vatican II articulated that each and every one of us, each and every one of the baptized, has a universal call to holiness. Each and every one of us is called to holiness. Doesn't matter whether we're the Pope. Pope Leo is very holy. Doesn't matter whether we're a priest or a religious. Holiness is not just for those people who have professed vows, but it's for everyone. It's everybody in this building. Everybody who's been baptized is called to holiness. Doesn't matter if you're a post office person. Doesn't matter if if you work in the medical field. It doesn't matter if you're a garbage man. It doesn't matter if you're a CEO. Each and every one of us who is baptized is called to holiness. And that's the great news. That's the great news, is that we are each and every one of us, God calls us to something great. And the great thing about it is that it's not just a one-time calling, but God is continually calling us each and every day, and sometimes in great and grand fashions. Mother Teresa, I was fortunate enough to know her in my life. She died when I was about 9 or 10, but she is one who really responded to God's call well. And it wasn't just at one point in her life, but many, many times throughout her life, she found that God was calling her to something new and different. So when she was a young girl in Macedonia, like modern-day Macedonia, she felt called to religious life. And so that led her on a missionary journey. She became a teacher. She became a professed sister in India. And she, at that point, was probably teaching at a school with probably more wealthy students. But it was one day that she was on a train to Darjeeling, which is a place in India, and she says what she described she received as a call within a call. She received a call within a call, that God was not only calling her to where she was, but He was calling her to something even further and deeper. And that was to serve the poorest of the poor in the world. And so she discerned that, she wrestled with it in prayer, and then she found that maybe God was calling her, and God was calling her to leave that and to form a mission. And so she formed the Missionaries of Charity, which is based out of Calcutta, and it's there where we kind of know her, that she did such great work and came to holiness. But she was serving really the poorest of the poor in the world. In America, we have poverty, but we have no poverty like they do in India. It's incredible. It's incredible just how poor the people are over there. But she was there. She was on the ground, and she was at their bedside, nursing them night after night, caring for the dying. So God called her to something great. And she would have been a very holy person if she had stayed where she was and she didn't respond to that call. But it was through responding to that call that made her one of the greatest saints in our modern day. So that's the great news, is that if we feel called, if we feel that God is calling us to do something, even in this day and age, maybe we feel that nudge, my response is lean into it. Bring it to prayer. Don't dismiss it. It may be something, maybe God is calling you to something. So that's the great news, is that if we do feel we're called, if God is calling us someplace, just lean into it. Bring it to prayer, and two things may be true. One, He's calling it to that, or two, is He's calling you to something else. But either way, if we're following the lead of God, if we're going closer to Him, we're going to be in a very good place. So that's the first part, mission. But the second is worship. Worship is essential for the life of the baptized, because worship, what we do today and what we do when we come to God, is what gives us our strength, especially the Holy Mass, especially the Eucharist. That is what gives us our strength and our purpose, is this worship. That's the third commandment. That's why God made it very important. That's number 3 on the list, to keep holy the Sabbath. And the best way, the most perfect way, probably the only way we can do it, is to gather as a people of God communally on Sunday, because that's where we will receive the most strength that we can find, is through the Holy Mass and through the Eucharist. So good news about that. But kind of going further than that, if you look at another example of that is, like, if you look at any religious institute, Catholic religious institute of people living in community, whether they're Franciscans, whether they're Dominicans, whether it's sisters in a convent, whether it's priests living together, before they do any of the good work that they do in their life, whether it's serving the poor, whether it's education, teaching people, whether it's going to nurse at a hospital, before they do any of that apostolic work, they begin the day with worship. They gather as a people, they gather as a community of professed religious, and they celebrate the Eucharist. Because it's not that they do not get their strength from their work, but they get it from God. So that's a starting point for the religious life. Some of them celebrate, every one of them celebrates the Mass every day, but a lot of them celebrate and they come together in prayer at least 5 to 7 times a day because they realize that that is where their strength comes from. So throughout this year, as we begin a new year, I want to focus from time to time, not every week, but I want to focus on liturgy. I want to kind of break open what the meaning of the Mass and the meaning of the liturgy is, just so that we may have a better reverence for it, but even kind of know just, hey, there's a lot more to this than meets the eye, and there's more than this than I thought was there. And there's a lot of great writings that teach us a little bit more about the liturgy, especially from Pope Benedict XVI. As a cardinal, he wrote, I don't know how he had time to do it, but he wrote like 60 books. And so Cardinal Ratzinger, at the time in the 1960s, wrote a book called The Spirit of the Liturgy. And in it, he kind of bounces around the idea, like, what is the purpose of liturgy? What is the purpose of the Mass? And it's very surprising, because he equates the liturgy, he equates the Mass, it's almost like a game. It's almost like recreation. He says that Mass is like play, because in the same time, it's kind of like a game has its own set of rules, the liturgy has its own set of rules. But at that time, the liturgy, Mass, allows us to escape from the daily obligations, the daily grind, and to just be with God. This is our opportunity to play with God, to be with Him in a more profound way, in a way we can't do it outside of here, that we get to hear the Word of God. We get to allow that to permeate our souls. We get to experience Jesus in the Eucharist. So he said that Mass is like play. So remember that. Like this is our opportunity to come and play with God. Now there's a lot of things that kind of come from this too. In the old Mass, before we came to the new Mass of the Vatican II, the priest used to do a lot of things before the Mass even began. He would go through and he would wash his hands. Then he would go through a list of prayers that he would do as he would vest. And sometimes we still do that to this day. But he would do one preparation that was related to time. And that was he would take his watch off. I didn't today. And I don't on Sunday because I have 3 Masses, so I don't want to be late going to Lafayette and going to Atisco. But he takes the watch off because it's a reminder to him and it's a reminder to everybody else that we're not in regular time anymore. We are going into a new venue, which is outside of time and allows us just to be with God, not to worry about the constraints and the dictatorship of our obligations, but just to enter into more and greater communion with our Lord. So today, that's something we probably need to hear, is that today is our opportunity to be with God in a really deep way. That's one of the purposes of the liturgy. But there's also another way to focus on this, another thing to focus about on liturgy. I was hearing somebody who came into the church a few years ago. He was an adult convert, and he was baptized. And he was talking about the first few months after he was baptized and became Catholic, and how he was facing some difficulty. So he tells the story that he was so excited to become baptized, become a Catholic, and he did. And a couple months in, he was realizing that, I'm struggling because I'm going to Mass every Sunday, but I don't know if I'm getting anything out of it. So one day he was talking to one of his friends who was a good, faithful friend, and brought this up to him. He confided in him. He said, I just became Catholic, and I'm having trouble. I feel like I'm not getting anything out of the Mass. And his friend turns to him and he says, that's okay. It's not about you. And he said that was the thing he needed to hear. That was the perfect thing he needed to hear, because it was a reminder too. Yes, I was focused too much on my feelings, but really this is my opportunity to be with God. So as we celebrate this baptism of the Lord, we remind ourselves of the importance of that call of baptism, but also too that our lives are not really about me, but it's about the one who calls me.